Within his own mindscape, Naruto couldn't help but admire the work that Kurama had done with the place. Gone was the dark and depressing sewer, and was replaced by a field filled with flowers of all shapes and sizes, and trees to help give shade as the sun shined overhead. And in place of a gate, there was now a small compound resembling a shrine with the word seal above the gate, providing the kitsune a more comfortable living space. Wow. Love what you've done with the place. It seems peaceful and relaxing. Naruto commented as he scratched the back of his head, while the kitsune was sitting on her knees and sipping at a cup of tea. A thin and almost unseen smile gracing her lips. Naturally. What were you expecting of me? Fire and brimstone? Kurama asked with a fake glare, as though she were pretending to be offended. She then sighed and continued to speak. It's not the real thing, but it's close to my dream home. No pun intended. Your dream home? Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow, wondering what the kitsune's wish was. Truth be told, all he had ever heard about the fox was that the Kyuubi no Kitsune was a creature of destruction and hatred incarnate, but now he knew there was way more to her. And he had to ask himself, what would a Biju want for his or herself? Yes. Someplace in the mountains, with flowers and trees. Someplace where I can feel the warm summer breeze flow past my fur, a place where I can lounge beneath the sun. Somewhere far, far away from humans, most especially senjus and uchihas. Kurama replied with voice filled with longing before taking another sip of tea. Senjus and uchihas, huh? Not many of those guys left anymore. I can understand why you hate the uchihas. I heard stories that Madara Uchiha could use his Sharingan to put you in a trance, like the masked guy from the night I was born. But what's your deal with the senjus? Naruto asked with a somewhat confused look as he sat across from the kitsune's currently human form with his legs crossed. For me to explain, allow me to share unto you a chapter of a darker age of the shinobi era. The kind of which that isn't taught in your academy. Have you ever heard of an era of time called the Bloody Clan Wars? The kitsune asked her current container, who could only shake his head, no, in response. Today, in this day and age, your Shadaime Hokage, Hashirama Senju is painted as a revolutionary, or a hero. But I am perhaps one of the few entities who know the facts. The real facts of what actually happened. This was during a period of time when the shinobi nations hadn't yet been founded. The shinobi clans were not but mercenaries that hired themselves out to the highest bidder. The senjus and uchihas were the most prominent of these clans, so much so that if one side hired the senjus, then the opposition would hire the uchihas, and vice versa. The fighting became so terrible amidst the clans, that there was an unspoken rule that no one should reveal their surname, for fear of accidentally revealing it to a member of a rivaling clan. Worse, the life expectancy was very short, usually ages 5 to 30. And even worse, children were forced into becoming ninja against their will, forced into being child soldiers. Even Hashirama's youngest brother was killed amidst the fighting. Finally, one day, when Hashirama reached full adulthood, he managed to broker a peace between the senjus and uchihas. And then both he and Madara founded Konoha, the village hidden in the leaves. Other nations followed this example and began creating their own shinobi nations. Hashirama desired for Madara to be the Shadaime, but seeing as how the village was a democracy, the people favored Hashirama instead, so he became the Shadaime Hokage against his wishes. Skip ahead some time later, and I was sealed inside of the Shadaime's wife, Mito Uzumaki, who had also sealed my siblings into other humans, becoming the first generation of Jinchuriki. A cage summit was then called, and Hashirama had decided on creating a balance of power to form a sense of equality and security for the other villages, and the Senju was quick to hand off my siblings and their containers as if they were free candy to the other villages. The kitsune explained and then stopped when she noticed that the blonde seemed ready to explode from this information. Suddenly, the blonde began to ask, whoa, whoa, whoa. Back up. The Shadaime wanted Madara to be Hokage instead. And he just gave away the Jinchuriki to other just like that. when he had them at his fingertips. You said his wife was your Jinchuriki at that time, and Hashirama faced you in combat when Madara summoned you and put you in a Sharingan-induced trance, so he should have known firsthand at the destructive capabilities of the Jinchuriki. Did the Jinchuriki themselves even get a say on if they wanted to stay in Konoha or not? When he finally stopped bombarding her with questions, the Kitsune simply answered, "You're finally beginning to understand. The untold facts are that Madara and Hashirama were once friends in boyhood. And in his efforts for peace, Hashirama in his misguidance and stupidity only worsened the state of the world and became one of the worst villains in history, but was painted as a great hero by the masses. Allow me to explain unto you, that so long as someone wants something that someone else has, they shall always go to war over it. Be it money, land, prestige, or even as Jinchuriki and Biju. Humankind will always find an excuse to fight with one another. Back in the bloody clan wars, the shinobi clans were told by their clients to loot, to rape, and to murder, and all for what? Coin. A sense of a job well done. Your whole shinobi system is nothing short of a sick and demented joke. And these same atrocities are still happening today, and little has changed. Hashirama never managed to establish a lasting peace, he just made the fighting more organized with the founding of villages and nations. I told these facts to your mother, and she understood all that I had said. Have you drawn the same conclusion as she once did? She asked him, finally finishing her history lesson as she waited for the boy's response. I don't know, what was my mother's conclusion? He asked the Kitsune, causing Kurama to gaze up towards the blue sky she had created within the mindscape, as though she were thinking back on that moment of time. After a few moments, the flame-haired Kitsune responded in a flat tone of voice, your mother's conclusion was complete and total control. She believed that within the elemental nations, only the strongest can change the course of things. Hashirama, at the time, was the strongest, but he was a poor leader. If he had been a bit wiser, then he would have kept my siblings and established an empire, stamping out anyone who would disturb the peace. The other cages would have been left in charge of their own villages, but would all ultimately answer to the Hokage. That was Kushina's conclusion. So then, tyranny, despotism, and, how do you know all this stuff? And, you hate the Senjus because of what the Shadaime did to your siblings? The blonde asked as he crossed his arms, his eyes closing as though he were deep in thought about everything he had been told. Kushina believes that in order to do good, you must also be willing to do evil. You cannot expect to make any progress towards your goal if you tiptoe around any issues or try to make nice with everyone around you. And you are correct, we Biju preferred to live and let live, out of sight from humankind, but your Shadaime refused to allow us to live in peace and forced us into becoming weapons and prizes for other villages. Is it wrong to wish to live beneath the sky? To feel the wind, the rain and the sun? Is it wrong to wish to be left alone? And how do I know? You'd be amazed what one can learn when sealed inside the Shadaime's wife. The Nine-Tails answered in a bitter tone, her crimson eyes now gaining an intimidating glow about them. Wow, so that's what you Biju have always wanted, was to be left alone. I had always heard that tailed beasts were nothing but monsters that should be kept locked away. Naruto admitted somberly as he scratched at his cheek, a slightly ashamed look on his face. A false narrative. It is much easier to collar and chain something, when it is viewed as a dumb and mindless beast instead of an intelligent creature that can think and reason for itself. But enough talk, it is time for you to awaken. You have an academy test to prepare for, yes. Think on all that which I have told you, and I may just grace you with my divine presence once more. The Kyuubi stated, and then with a snap of her fingers, caused the blonde to vanish in a flash of light as she expelled him from the mindscape. Real world. Naruto's eyes snapped open and he found himself in Anko's bed, still fully dressed as he looked at the clock and realized that if he didn't leave quickly, then he'd be late for the Genin exam. Shaking off his sleepiness, he then leapt out of the bed and into the living room area, finding Anko herself sitting at the dining table with a newspaper, a mug of coffee and a fully prepared bento with his name attached to it with a sticky note. Hey there. Made you a bento. Be sure to knock Aruka for a loop. The snake mistress spoke with a loving smile, prompting the whiskered teen to put a short but sweet kiss on her lips and then hug her nude frame before grabbing the bento and rushing out the door, only for his face to press into something soft and squishy before he pulled back, and found the form of his birth mother preparing to knock on the door. She appeared to be caught off guard for a split second, but then she smiled and spoke, "Hey there, kiddo. Where's the fire?" She asked him with a slightly teasing grin. She then looked past him and spotted Anko, who was currently sitting nude and now seemed akin to a deer caught in the headlights as she stared back at the crimson-haired woman. Why is Anko-chan? Oi, Anko. You already putting the moves on my child. You should at least wait till he's a chunin. Kushina called out in a teasing tone. The snake user awkwardly waved at her former teacher and replied, "Nah. I haven't done anything inappropriate with him. We have a no clothes inside the home type rule." Huh. That actually sounds kinda why. Anyways, what luck that you actually ran into me, Naruto-kun. I was actually hoping to catch you so we could walk together to the academy. Since I'm now the Godime Hokage, I thought it best that I see what needs fixing around the village, starting with where the next generation of ninjas begin to learn. Kushina explained as she turned her attention to the blonde, though he couldn't help but sweat drop at how casually she handled Anko's explanation for her nudity. Then it struck him when the blonde realized that now he was related to not one, but two Hokages now. Trying to contain his awe, the blonde boy cleared his throat and asked, "That's awesome. I wouldn't mind walking with you a bit, and yeah, that's not a bad idea to try and make the academy better. But what about the guy that kidnapped you, and what's with the doggy kennel?" Naruto asked at the end, pointing to a large kennel that Kushina was carrying in her hand. The sounds of crying and whimpering coming from it. "Don't worry about my kidnapper, he's already worm food. And this? Well, your old classmate and school bully Sakura's in there. Take a look." The crimson-haired woman offered as she held the cage a bit higher, prompting the blonde to look through the door and see that it was indeed the pinkett herself curled into a ball as she seemed to be nursing a pair of broken fingers. "Wasn't she kidnapped? And why do you have her locked in a doggy cage?" The blonde asked with a raised eyebrow, feeling slightly sorry for the pink-haired girl. Though seeing her like this also gave him a twinge of satisfaction given her abusive treatment of him back in the academy. Actually, she ran away from home. It would seem that Kazashi doesn't treat his family very well. And as for the cage, I didn't want her running off or vanishing before she can testify against her old man. Kushina replied, speaking more than loud enough for Anko to hear, making the snake mistress realize that Kushina had already made up some kind of cover story to explain Sakura's disappearance. Gotta hand it to her for thinking on her feet despite only just recently returning to Konoha. The blonde glanced between his birth mother and the doggy cage with some suspicion, but chose not to question it, largely since he felt no obligation to aid Sakura due to her frequent mistreatment of him back at the academy, and for her badmouthing Anko earlier. Could he have stood up to her himself? Very easily, but then she'd throw a tantrum and tattle on her daddy, and then the bastard Kazashi would have made things harder for the blonde boy in the long run. Hence why he never directly fought back against Sakura. "Naruto, help me, help me," Sakura whispered, the fingertips of her uninjured hand poking through the door, prompting Kushina to kick the underside of the kennel and speak, "Shut up or I'll drown you, Haruno." The threat quickly silenced the pinkett as she retreated back into her curled ball state and let out a shrill whimper. "Shall we go then? Time's wasting," the crimson-haired woman asked, earning a small nod from her son. After waving goodbye to Anko, the two Uzumakis proceeded to walk towards the academy, all the while ignoring the occasional whimper from the doggy kennel. The whiskered teen had his hands clasped behind his head as he spoke, "Barely back in Konoha and you're already the Godime Hokage. You don't waste any time, do you?" His mother chuckled as she replied back, "Well, what can I say? People find it very difficult to say no to me. And the sooner I can set up shop, the better. I still need to do an official introductory speech and all that good stuff, but that can wait until I've gotten a better picture as how the village is currently running. The academy seemed like a good place to start. The blonde nodded in understanding since she had been trapped in a coma for so long that she would need to see how things worked firsthand since some things were probably a bit different than how she originally remembered them. Wait a sec. If you're the Hokage now, shouldn't you be cooped up in the Hokage's office dealing with paperwork all the livelong day? The blonde asked out of curiosity. Wheel. Kushina spoke as she scratched her cheek with a single finger, a bright and triumphant looking smile on her face as she thought back on her solution to the paperwork issue. Flashback. Earlier that morning. Okay, that should be enough. Kushina muttered with a small sigh as she stared at multiple bags filled with blood. A kunai was held in her hands as a deep cut along her wrist quickly closed up. Fortunately, she wouldn't need to worry about bleeding out or anything due to the high-speed regeneration of the Uzumaki clan. Hell, the only legit reason she came so close to death during the Kyuubi attack was because of her body being severely weakened from both the birthing process and from Kurama being forcibly removed from her. Focusing chakra into the blood bags, they then burst open much like water balloons as the blood began to shape and take form until several perfect replicas of Kushina herself stood before her. Kami, do I love blood clones. The perfect body doubles. And unlike shadow clones, they don't expire until they are dispelled by the caster, or are killed. All right, ladies, listen up. As of now, I, Kushina, the evil Uzumaki, am now the Godime Hokage. The red-haired woman announced, earning a series of cheers from her clones. It would seem that this village is in a mess, and is in dire need of new leadership. To help keep this village going forward, I have officially disbanded both the civilian and elder councils. Sure, there's a lot more paperwork to be done with them gone, but this only means we have more control over the village's economy. Now, get to work on the paperwork immediately. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Kushina shouted, prompting her blood clones to salute and begin to power through the piles of paperwork with the efficiency of a machine. With the paperwork problem out of the way, she could now see firsthand the village's workings. And since today, as marked by the calendar, was Academy exam day, the school for the next generation of shinobi would be a good place to start. Not to mention she could silently cheer on Naruto. End flashback. Wow, so the whole time, the old man could have just used clones like that to do the paperwork. So much for being the professor. Naruto commented with a chuckle, finding it rather funny how the Sandaime never realized he could simply cheat. No kidding. Maybe he was going senile. The evil Uzumaki replied with a dry laugh as they neared the academy, making them realize that the walk had been surprisingly short. Though they continued on as they neared Naruto's classroom, the blonde wishing that this would be the last time he'd have to endure a day within the academy. It didn't take long for them to reach the doorway to his class. The blonde opened the doorway and ushered his mother inside. As soon as they both stepped inside, the teacher Iruka stared at the form of Naruto and muttered, "You're late. As such, you won't be permitted to partake in the genin exam." At this statement, the whiskered teen glanced at the clock and found that he was actually on time. He was about to call the scarred Chunin on his bullshit, but his mother stepped forward. "Is he? So sorry about that. Name's Kushina Uzumaki. And I'm the new Godime Hokage." The red-haired woman announced, earning a series of gasps from the classroom, and both Iruka and his partner Mizuki stood utterly dumbfounded at this news. "Uzumaki, are you related to Naruto? And, since when did you become the new Hokage? I didn't hear anything about this." The scarred Chunin spoke in confusion as he glanced between the mother and son pair. "Yeah, I can understand the confusion. My appointment was kind of an out-of-the-blue emergency type thing. And yes, I am Naruto-kun's mother. And before you ask, I was stuck in a coma until just recently." She spoke in utter annoyance, as she fingered the handle of her katana. Almost as if she was feeling the need to cut apart something right now. The scarred Chunin tried to protest Naruto being able to enter the Chunin exam but was cut off by the crimson-haired woman. The bell hasn't rung just yet, so Naruto-kun is still on time. And I'm warning you right now, Mr. Unimportant Chunin, I shall be attending these exams just as well and observing your conduct and how the exams are handled. And if I don't like what I see or find, I'll be sure to gut you just like a fish. She warned him and then drew her sword, the rusty tip of the katana pressing against the Chunin's vest. That's a very poorly maintained weapon. This rusty old thing could easily break, plus rusty swords can't hold an edge anyway. Iruka spoke in his lecturing voice, finding it absurd that someone proclaiming to be Hokage would use such a useless weapon. The female Uzumaki smirked a bit and then gave the flat of her blade a quick flick with her fingers, knocking off some of the rust and grime, revealing a bit of a shimmering blade covered with seals. Normal swords, yes, but this one I specially designed and put very specific seals on so that rust could gather freely, but not cause the blade to lose its effectiveness. Being a ninja, you should know not to judge a book by its cover. And this sword definitely has an edge. I can happily give you a demonstration as I cut off certain unneeded parts of your body, unimportant Chunin. She spoke in a sickly sweet voice, causing the room to be consumed by a dark dread-filled atmosphere. My name is Iruka. The teacher tried to introduce himself, but was cut off when Kushina dropped the strange doggy kennel she was holding to the floor, earning a yelp from the occupant, and then the crimson-haired woman sat atop the kennel with a bored yawn. I don't care. To me, you're just another rank-and-file Chunin without any significance. Only reason Chunin take positions as academy teachers is for easy jobs away from the realities of being a true shinobi. Now shut up and commence the exams so I can observe. The crimson-haired woman demanded, her patience already starting to run out. Who or what is in that? The scarred Chunin prepared to ask, only to notice that the tip of the katana blade was now pointed at his crotch, making his voice falter until he directed his assistant to hand out the exam papers to the students. Once the papers had been assigned to each student, the crimson-haired woman knew that this part of the exam would be largely uneventful, but this could help her size up any noteworthy students. The first student to catch her eye was most obviously her own son, who was busy scribbling down his answers, all the while hiding a smirk of amusement since he had always wanted to see Iruka properly put in his place. The second student she took note of was Sasuke Uchiha, who was sending glances of both curiosity and envy in Kushina's direction. The female Uzumaki immediately sneered in disgust upon seeing that the Uchiha didn't have the kindness or patience of his late mother Makoto. Instead she saw that hunger and need for power, for supremacy. Just like Fugaku. Typical Uchiha male. While not one to take part in misandry, most Uchiha males were nothing short of scum and the world may have been better off without the males of the clan. The females tended to be far more composed and compassionate, whereas the males often exhibited Madara syndrome, so named after the infamous Konoha co-founder. Symptoms usually involved but were not limited to a mixed superiority-inferiority complex, lack of regard for human life, an obsessive hunger for power, and self-destructive and illogical behavior. Moving on, the next one she noticed was a girl of obvious Hyuga descent due to her pale eyes, though the lack of a covering for her forehead to hide the caged bird seal suggested she was of the main branch, likely Hiashi and Hitomi's child. The two females locked eyes together, almost as if they were giving a silent greeting to one another, until the Hyuga girl gave a small nod and resumed her work on the exam. It seemed there was more to this one, so the Uzumaki decided she might be worth observing. As the minutes began to tick by and the written exams were completed, the teachers collected the papers. With that portion of the exams done, it was now time for the jutsu half, which was the real make-or-break part of the exams. One by one, the students performed the three basic academy jutsu, the substitution, the henge, and the basic clone jutsu. All the while Kushina felt unsatisfied by these subpar results. She could tell by the thin frames of these students that they hadn't received much in the way of practical lessons, And worse, the academy had become a breeding ground for fangirls, as evidenced by the Uchiha's fangirls squealing when he'd performed the most basic of jutsu. Kushina would need to revamp the academy's curriculum to include more advanced jutsu training, elemental nature classes, hardcore taijutsu training, and of course she would need much stricter teachers. Finally, it was the turn of Naruto Uzumaki himself, who had a triumphant look on his face and spoke, "Prepare to be amazed." He then formed a single hand sign and called out, "Shadow Clone Jutsu." In several puffs of smoke, at least 10 perfect copies of the whiskered teen stood behind him with their arms crossed over their chests, all sharing the same proud smirk on their faces just like the original. Uruka's eyes widened momentarily and he tightened his grip around his clipboard as if to prevent himself from dropping it. Then with a sneer the scarred Chunin spoke in a blunt manner, "You fail." At this, a huge tick mark formed on the blonde boy's head as he lunged forward, grabbing the Chunin by his vest and pulling him down to his height. The boy's sapphire blue eyes holding an intense glow to them now, almost as if they had been lit aflame. "Do you mean I fail? I just pulled a shadow clone jutsu. That's a goddamn high-ranking jutsu that even Jonin have a hard time using." The blonde spoke angrily, his face flushing red in anger, while in the background the rest of the class quietly watched the scene unfold. Even Kushina simply looked on, eagerly waiting to see how her son would react and deal with this pompous Chunin. The rules clearly state that an academy student must use the clone jutsu. If you can't perform such a basic jutsu, then I can't allow you to pass. Uruka explained and then tried to pry the boy's hands off of his vest, only to find Naruto's grip tightening even more. "Oh yeah, that's just the problem, I literally can't use the clone jutsu. My chakra reserves are way too strong to be used for a kiddie jutsu like that. And I bet you knew that all this time, didn't you, ya piece of shit?" The blonde shouted and then reared his fist back and punched the Chunin right across the jaw, earning a series of gasps from the class, and a cruel smile from Kushina. Did I do to deserve such crappy treatment? Why can't I have a fair chance like everyone else? I worked hard on the shadow clones that Anko-sama taught me, so that I could be her apprentice. The blonde shouted angrily. 3 years' worth of frustration and anger in the academy finally boiling over as the boy snapped and continued to land blow after blow on the teacher's face. Some blood and teeth flying out from the teacher's mouth until the blonde wrapped his hands around Aruka's throat and started to strangle him. At this point, Mizuki snapped out of his stupor and attempted to step in, only to be tripped by the scabbard of Kushina's katana, and she planted a foot on the back of his neck to keep him pinned to the floor. After a few moments, Uruka began to turn blue in the face from the lack of air, until finally Naruto scoffed and tossed him to the floor. "You aren't worth it," was all Naruto said with a huff as he crossed his arms with a look of frustration. His mother nodded with a small smile and spoke, "By the power vested in me as Hokage, I say that Naruto-kun has passed the exams with flying colors." Uruka however gasped and wheezed for air as he choked out, "The little bastard tried to kill me." The scarred teacher tried to get up, only to be met with the tip of a rusty katana but a bare inch away from his face. The form of Kushina smirking in an almost feral manner. "That's right. He did. Best remember that the next time you see him, and you should also take note, that I allowed him to try. Now then, I have found this batch of genin to be somewhat lackluster. It would seem we need a more thorough academy training system, and a much looser grading system. Naruto-kun, perhaps you could share with me some details of your academy days later on. I think new teachers are needed." She spoke, earning a nod from her son as he collected a headband for himself and tied it around his arm, flipping the bird to both of the incapacitated teachers, who could only glare at the boy. With that said and done, Kushina stood up and picked up the doggy kennel. "Nice meeting you all. I look forward to being you Hokage for the foreseeable future." With that said, she gestured for her son to follow, prompting the blonde to nod as the two Uzumakis left together, earning some fearful muttering from the students. Meanwhile, out in the hall, the two Uzumakis walked side by side. The crimson-haired female chuckling as she spoke, I'm surprised you didn't kill that man. You seemed like you really wanted to. He must have really been a thorn in your side for years. Naruto shrugged as he replied, yeah. I did want to. That asshole has done nothing but hold me back. But then I changed my mind. I figured that he'll be able to suffer more if I keep him alive for now. His response earned a small laugh from his mother. My, seems you got a little sadism from me and Anko-chan. It is true that if you were to kill him, he would no longer suffer. But don't allow a possible annoyance to nip at you in the future. She replied back with a chuckle. You know, it's kinda weird. All I ever wanted was to be a ninja, and now that I am one, where do I go from here? What kind of a goal do I set for myself? The blonde questioned, sighing since becoming Hokage for a village full of people that hated him for something that wasn't his fault would likely be more trouble than it was worth, though on the other hand, it would in a way, be a kind of revenge. You'll figure something out. Right now, I intend to make Konoha into a strong village. His mother proudly proclaimed with a chuckle, earning a raised eyebrow from the blonde Jinchuriki. Isn't Konoha already strong? I mean, it's hailed as the strongest shinobi village, right? He asked, and then Kushina let out a loud snap of her fingers as she pointed at the boy, then slowly raised her fingertip upwards and waved it from side to side making a tisk tisk noise. Silly naive boy. Konoha is, supposedly, the strongest. However, it seems that during the Sandame's reinstatement, Konoha has really lagged behind. What people fail to realize is that peacetime is a fleeting and fragile thing, just like the seasons of the year. At any point of time, when we least expect it, we could be thrust into another war. Peacetime is the absolute best time to prepare for whatever may come our way. Remember this, Naruto-kun, even if you think you're the strongest warrior in existence, almost always someone even stronger will someday come along to challenge you. So never, ever, allow yourself to waste away in stagnation and laziness. She warned him and then gave him a small boop on the nose, followed by a kiss on the forehead, earning a chuckle from the blonde boy and a huge neon red blush on his face. Thanks. I guess I have plenty of hardcore training to look forward to from Anko-sama. Will you be training me too? You must have lots of great techniques to teach me. Heck, I could also use some help learning to use Kurama's power. He spoke in an excited manner, quickly taking her advice to heart, and something in him felt very eager and excited to fight strong opponents in the future. Of course, I'd be delighted to teach you some tricks of the trade. Now if you'll excuse me, I have just a few more loose ends to tie up. You go back to Anko's and rest for a bit. The crimson-haired woman spoke and then vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving Naruto by himself as he headed back home. All the while, he couldn't help but think of the things Kurama and Kushina had told him. About how the Biju and Jinchuriki were taken advantage of to create a false peace, about needing to prepare for the future. It made him think on how messed up things were since he remembered reading about the past shinobi world wars. What were they even fought over? Land, jutsu, Biju, bloodlines. He couldn't remember the exact reason. Maybe in the end, there wasn't even a point to it all. Maybe the war was over some pointless squabble. His musing was broken when he stopped in front of a weapons store that his old friend Tenten worked at when she wasn't on missions. Gaining an idea, he entered the store and found the brown-haired girl behind the counter, casually cleaning some of the katanas. When she looked up, she was delighted to see the form of Naruto had come to visit her. Hey there, Naruto-kun. Good to see you again. What can I do for you? She asked him in a cheery manner, a small blush forming on her cheeks, and then she noticed that he now had a shinobi headband tied to his arm. So you finally passed the exams, huh? Your pal Anko teach you a few tricks? The bun-haired girl asked, knowing the closeness of the two pariahs. That, and I beat the snot out of Iruka after he tried failing me, again. The blonde admitted openly with a sheepish grin as he rubbed the back of his head. Seriously? And you got away with that? Still, I guess he did have it coming to him. She admitted, remembering full well how the Chunin teacher seemed to almost always single out the blonde over every little thing. Hell yeah, I got away with it since the Hokage was in the same room, and she so happens to be my mom. The whiskered teen replied with a small blush as he scratched at one of his whisker marks, prompting his old friend to nod, and then freeze up when she registered what he had said. Wait, what did you say? She asked him, now realizing he had mentioned that the Hokage was his mother. Rumors had been circulating that a new Hokage had been placed in office, but an official village address hadn't happened yet due to the new Hokage seemingly busying herself with multiple tasks. Long story. I'll tell you about it later. Anyway, I came here to ask you if you could make custom weaponry for me. He responded in a more businesslike tone. In response, Tenten perked up at the mentioning of weaponry, and slammed a massive book onto the counter which happened to be a catalog for different kinds of weapons. Sure thing. I can hook you right up. What kind of weapon are you looking for? You want something more traditional like a katana, or a staff? Or are you looking for something a bit more unorthodox? There's something for everyone here. Tenten proclaimed, going into her weapon otaku mode. Actually, I was thinking of stepping outside the norm. The blonde responded with a small smirk, earning a look of interest from the weapon specialist. She then smirked as she felt that this was going to be a somewhat difficult but worthwhile order. And she loved a good weapon-related challenge. Meanwhile, Hokage office. Kushina sat behind her new desk with a smirk, drawing up some designs for a new Uzumaki compound since their family was now an official clan of the village. And about damn time too. This compound would be set behind the Hokage mountain away from the rest of the village to allow for plentiful room to train with her son. Standing at her side was Sakura Haruno, who was busy stretching out her limbs after being kept in a doggy kennel for so long. Gone was her usual attire and instead replaced with a white kimono with the kanji for slave embroidered on the back. A seal in the form of a choker kept wrapped tight around her neck, solidifying her new position. The crimson-haired woman looked up from her designs and spoke to a waiting group of Anbu with one Neko at the front. Are my orders understood? The former Jinchuriki asked with a small smile, earning a series of nods from the Anbu squad. They are. We shall retrieve them immediately. Neko promised, and then she and the squad vanished in a series of swirling leaves, allowing Kushina to continue her work, while her blood clones continued to work on paperwork in an adjacent room. So far they had done some serious tax cuts on shinobi goods, leveraged trade routes, had Danzo's corpse and mutated arm incinerated, and were drawing up a new academy curriculum to better train the students. Perhaps D ranks should also be delegated to academy students to help them gain work experience as well. After a few more minutes of scribbling, the door to the Hokage's office burst open, revealing Mebuki Haruno herself. The blonde woman immediately rushed towards her daughter and tightly embraced her. Oh my baby. You're safe. When your father told me that Kushina had done something to you. Mebuki's words got caught in her throat as she sobbed, and then she pulled back and saw her daughter now had a slave collar and kimono, as well as a pair of broken fingers that were now kept in a finger brace to keep them straight so they could properly heal. What the did you do to my child? Mebuki screeched, slamming her hands down on the Hokage desk, her motherly instincts overriding her fear of Kushina. Not much. All I did was break 2 fingers and she started to sing for me like a canary. Poor girl has a very low pain tolerance. Oh, and I took her as a slave for my family and soon-to-be clan. Think of it as taking collateral for all the years your husband has been meddling in my family's affairs. Kushina stated with a somewhat snark expression. Sakura's just a child. She's innocent. Don't you have any sense of morality? Mebuki stated, clenching her fists tightly into a white-knuckle grip. Any sense? Honey, I have no morals whatsoever. And your daughter isn't exactly a little angel. Sakura, tell your mommy what you told me after I broke your fingers. The crimson-haired woman spoke, earning a nod from the pinkett. My dad, Kazashi, he would always pressure me into pursuing a relationship with Sasuke Uchiha. He wanted me to marry Sasuke so that we could get into the Uchiha fortune. He also told me to hurt Naruto as often as possible, whenever possible, for any reason. And I did. I always beat up Naruto, because I thought it was fun to use him like a stress ball, and I had a feeling of invincibility. If Naruto ever fought back against me, then Dad would raise hell and make him suffer. So I could do anything, and now I need to pay. I'm now a slave to repay all the harm I did to Naruto over the years. Sakura explained. When she had finished speaking, her new mistress patted the pinkett on the head as if she were a puppy. Sakura tensed up at first, but then relaxed since she was being given some affection. Good girl. There you have it. Oh, and while we're talking about Kazashi, where is the little pink-haired weasel? Kushina asked with a toothy grin, drumming her fingertips against the desk in excitement to torturing the man himself. Gone to the daimyo. To expose your tyranny. Please. I'm begging you. I'll give you anything you want. I'll do anything. Say anything. Just let my child go. Mebuki pleaded, sinking to her knees as she felt pure despair fill her heart. She had tried to be a patient and understanding mother, and obviously she spoiled and doted on her child, but maybe she should have been stricter. If she had protected Sakura more from her father's poisonous influence, maybe the girl would have been a better person and kunoichi. Not gonna happen. No offense Mebuki-chan, but I'm not known to be forgiving. And the way I see it, taking away Kazashi's meal ticket to the Uchiha fortune is pretty poetic justice. So long as Sakura behaves herself, I won't do anything cruel to her. Who knows? Maybe someday she can move up to being a concubine for my son. She can help produce lots of adorable grandbabies for me. The violet-eyed woman spoke with a small chuckle. At that statement, Mebuki's body began to shake violently, her desperation and rage taking over as she lunged at the Uzumaki woman. You heartless bitch. She screamed out but was then forced back when a swift kick connected to her jaw, sending her sprawling across the floor. Heartless. Sure. I'll give you that one. But if nothing else, at least I'm honest about myself and what I do for a living. Unlike your husband who has swindled people out of their hard-earned money. Hell, back during the war, your husband would leverage UAL favors from female prisoners. Hence why I got his fired from the Shinobi Corps all those years ago. The crimson-haired woman spoke flatly, scratching at the side of her cheek. She then looked down and saw a blood spatter on one her shinobi sandals, making her sneer a bit. Then a small idea came to mind. Wait. You said you'd do anything for Sakura, right? Prove it then. Lick your own blood off of my feet and sandal. The evil Uzumaki stated. The blonde trophy wife swallowed hard, and glanced at her daughter who had an unsure and somewhat confused expression on her face. Seeing little choice, Mebuki prostrated herself in front of the Uzumaki woman and began to lick off the droplets of blood. All the while she could only think and hope that this might appease Kushina and potentially save Sakura from her fate. Tell you what, I won't release Sakura, but you will be granted visitation rights. You can come see her whenever you want to ensure she's being well treated in my family's care. I'll even let you keep your hubby's ill-earned money, on one condition. The evil Uzumaki spoke with a feral grin, very much eager to ruin Kazashi's life. For let it be known, that when Kushina Uzumaki hold a grudge, she will never let it go that easily. Mebuki looked up and gulped, knowing that while Kushina was a brute, a bully, and a savage, she was a woman of her word. What condition? Was all the blonde woman could ask, prompting the crimson-haired woman to reply, all right then, listen closely. Elsewhere. Some time later. Yay. We actually won. We can pay off a lot of our debts with this money. Spoke the form of Shizune with a cheer, a pig in her arms also oinking in happiness. However, a certain Sanin was not feeling as optimistic. Tsunade was constantly looking over her shoulder, knowing that whenever she won at gambling, it usually spelled out as some kind of bad omen. The bigger the payout, the worse it could get. And she had just won a pretty large sum in a poker match just recently. You're not wrong. Would be nice to get the debt collectors off our backs for a while. Maybe go somewhere nice to eat. The slug Sanin spoke to her assistant, largely to try and reassure herself that nothing was wrong, and began to cash in her prize poker chips for the needed money. Suddenly she felt her assistant tug at her shoulder, making the blonde woman reply, "Almost done, Shizune. Hey, we haven't been to a hot spring in a while, yeah. Would be nice to soak in and relax. Tsunade-sama, we have company now." Shizune spoke in a worried tone, followed by a small whine from Tenten. "What? The debt collectors here already? Tell them that I just won some money, I can pay off some of my debts in just a minute." The Sanin spoke in a dismissive manner as she waited for her prize money to be handed over. "It's not debt collectors. It's Anbu," the black-haired woman stated, making her sensei perk up and blubber, "Wait. What?" Upon turning around, the Sanin saw a squad of Anbu with a purple-haired female wearing a cat mask standing at the front of the group. Numerous civilians began backing away in case there was any trouble. Neko stepped forward a bit and then spoke in a professional manner, "Tsunade Senju, Shizune Kato. You are hereby ordered to return to Konoha. Effective immediately. By the authority of the new Godime Hokage." The two women looked at one another, not having heard yet about a new Hokage, so this was indeed news for them. "Godime? Who's the Godime? Jiraiya finally step up, or maybe Kakashi? What about Maida guy?" The slug Sanin asked out of curiosity, wondering who had the stones to take the same coveted position that had robbed her of many friends and family that had either taken the title or sought after it. For a moment, it seemed almost as if Neko was grinning behind her mask as she bluntly replied, "Kushina, the evil, Uzumaki." At the very mentioning of the name, the entire area fell deathly quiet. The numerous civilians all paled until they were deathly white. Even Tsunade and Shizune couldn't help but tremble in terror at that name. The name that was the secret fear of the elemental nations. This is all a joke, right? She's dead. Kushina's dead. Tsunade tried to deny it. But the Anbu shook their heads negatively. "Anbu don't deal in jokes. If you refuse to return, then we shall have to inform Kushina-sama of your poor decision. And then she will need to list you both as rogue ninja. Your names and pictures will be put in the bingo book, and large bounties shall be placed on you. The only reason you have been allowed so much freedom is because Sandaime-sama had always been soft on his students, the Sanin. That ends today." Neko spoke in a chilly voice, prompting both the Sanin and her student to start whispering amongst one another. "Tsunade-sama, running from debt collectors is one thing. But this is Kushina. She doesn't make idle threats. And we can't spend our days running from bounty hunters." Shizune warned her sensei in an urgent tone. The busty Sanin sighed in defeat and nodded as she replied, "Yeah. This would be one fight with no hope of winning. If nothing else, we can at least see what it is she wants." The black-haired woman nodded in agreement as the two faced the Anbu again. Okay, we'll go." Tsunade reluctantly agreed, crossing her arms beneath her impressive bust. "Good choice. Not that you had one to begin with," Neko stated with some humor in her voice as they all departed back to Konoha. Unknown to them, a local news reporter had been listening the whole time and was furiously scribbling down notes. If Kushina was now the new Godime and was now teaming up with Tsunade Senju, this could be the kind of news that could shoot him up the corporate ladder. And news like this would inevitably spread across the entire elemental nations like wildfire. In the Hokage office, Kushina had just gotten a report that Neko and her squad had just made contact with Tsunade and her apprentice Shizune and were already on the way back to Konoha with all haste. Now the evil Uzumaki was preparing her official inauguration speech so that she may finally announce herself as the new Hokage of Konoha. Granted, she should have done that sooner, but there was so much work to be done. Not to mention there was also that prick Kazashi, scuttling around like a cockroach and no doubt kissing up to the daimyo to depose her. Fortunately, she'd already taken some steps in making sure that she'd be able to crush that pink-haired degenerate underfoot. The Godime's musing was broken when she heard her new slave approaching nervously, carrying a tray of tea and snacks for the Hokage. Sakura carefully placed them onto the desk and then began pouring the tea into a cup for her new mistress, making Kushina smirk a bit. Glad you caught on to be a slave so quickly. Saves me a lot of time in having to train you. Finish up by tossing the Hokage portraits in the trash, then you can go home to see your mom. The crimson-haired woman requested, earning a nod from the Pinkett. Thank you Kushina-sama. Can I ask you a question? Or two? Sakura asked as she proceeded to take down the portraits for disposal. The Pinkett had quickly found out that the best way to avoid being painfully punished was to keep her head down and do whatever her new mistress commanded. She knew of her intentions to keep her as a possible concubine for her son Naruto. And the thought of being used as a pleasure slave made her a little ill, but Naruto wasn't a bad person, so it shouldn't be all bad. That aside, she admittedly knew absolutely nothing about her new mistress as a person, save that people are terrified of her. Ask away. I've nothing to hide, unlike some people I know, or knew. The crimson-haired woman replied bluntly, and also hinting towards the now deceased Danzo, who was deeply connected to the dark underbelly of Konoha, and should have been killed years ago. Why does my dad hate you so much? Why are you called the evil Uzumaki? And why are people so scared of you? Sakura asked plainly, wanting to know more about this mysterious woman who had seemingly popped up out of nowhere and began terrifying people, almost as though she were some kind of ghost. With a smirk, the crimson-haired woman set down her pen to take a break from writing out her speech and replied in a tone of amusement, "Now those are pretty good questions. Aren't they? Well, my story starts off something like this. Years earlier. She won't quit giving me that stink eye," muttered Akumo Jonin as he glanced back at a bound Kushina who was heatedly glaring at him in defiance. If she had the power, she would have definitely set him ablaze by now with just her gaze. Just ignore her. We're almost at the border. Spoke a second Kumo Nin as he shoved the girl forward, not seeing her slowly dropping strands of her crimson hair to leave as a breadcrumb trail. Why's this little bitch so special anyway? She doesn't look that important. The first one asked, getting more and more irritated by Kushina's constant staring. What are you? Stupid. Look at her hair. She's from the Uzumaki clan, not many of them left anymore. Plus, she's gotta be the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, only Uzumakis can contain that kind of power. The second Jonin answered with a proud grin. Once they brought her to Kumo, they would be very richly rewarded for this contribution to Kumo's already impressive military might. A small scoff came from Kushina as she finally spoke for the first time. Must feel really proud of yourselves, huh? A bunch of punk-ass adults ganging up and kidnapping a kid, bringing her to a village where rape has been legalized. I hope you all burn in hell. Hell is exactly where you're going, kid. We're gonna strap you down and have fun-ing that sweet little of yours to help make future Jinchuriki. In this world we live in, there's only victors and victims. And a little helpless thing like you was born to be a victim. Spoke a third Jonin as he cupped her chin in his hand, only for her to pull back and bite down hard on his hand. The Jonin yelled out in pain as he pulled his hand away and then threw a punch towards the girl's face. You bitch. I'll teach you not to mess with a Kumo Jonin. He shouted and began to unbuckle his belt and proceeded to lower his pants, pinning the girl to the ground as he tried to tear off her clothes. The Uzumaki kicked and wriggled, putting up as much fight as she could while the other Jonin looked on and laughed at her pathetic struggles. Kushina grit her teeth as red began to fill her vision, her fight-or-flight instincts taking over as she screeched and then lunged forward, slamming her forehead into the nose of her would-be rapist. The sounds of cartilage crunching as the Jonin screamed out, clutching his broken nose. The ropes binding her hands behind her back snapped apart as she threw herself onto the Jonin, her teeth sinking into the flesh of his neck. Blood began to fill her mouth as her teeth cut into his throat, and then she yanked her head back, tearing out a large chunk of flesh, blood sprayed out, dousing her in the crimson liquid. Spitting out the chunk of human flesh, she stared coldly at the other Jonin, who could only stare in horror. Then, she pounced, and nothing but the sounds of flesh tearing and blood-curdling screams filled the woods. Minutes later, drip, 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 were the sounds that could be heard in the dead of night as the girl stood quietly amongst a group of corpses. Blood pooling around her mouth and crimson droplets falling from her knuckles, her fists shaking as she stared at the ground, her violet-colored eyes locked onto a crimson pool that reflected the light of the moon. The girl, known as Kushina Uzumaki, continued to stare off into space until she spoke to herself. There are only victors and victims in this world. One would think that a little girl like her would be sobbing, crying, or quivering in horror at the gruesome scene. But instead, the young Kushina's face was nothing but a blank canvas. Her musing was broken when she heard movement as a Kumo nin began to crawl away, desperately trying to escape. The young girl picked up a large rock and stalked towards the injured ninja, raising the stone into the air, preparing to crush the man's head. He looked up with some tears in his eyes, a hand raised in surrender as he began to plead for his life. No. Please. Just let me go. I have a wife. A child. I just want to see them again. He then reached into his clothes and pulled out a photograph of himself, standing with a woman holding a baby in her arms. However, his pleas fell on deaf ears as Kushina quickly brought the rock down, smashing his head and splitting it open. Then she raised it up and brought it down again, and again until his head was nothing but a pool of blood, crimson mush and bits of bone. If you cherished them, you would have stayed in Kumo instead of kidnapping girls. Kushina coldly muttered as she tossed the rock aside and then grabbed the deceased man's ninja tool pouch. She then sighed and thought back on the events that led up to this moment. She had to do it. In this world, it is kill or be killed. They would have raped her over and over again, forcing her to be bred like a prize pig or some other kind of cattle. Then when she became barren, and useless to them, would have been thrown away like trash. Something inside of the young Kushina snapped as she looked down at her bloodied hands, her lips twitching upwards into a cruel and twisted smile. Looking back on it, she now realized why Uzu had fallen, relying on the help of a village that never came to aid them. Sure, they held their own against a large coalition of enemies, but to rely on others was nothing short of weakness. No one came to save Uzu, and no one came to save little Kushina. She saved herself. The only one she could rely on was herself. She would never let herself become a victim, she would become strong. Stronger than anyone. No one would dare mess with her. Even if she needed to throw aside her humanity and become something less than human, she would gladly do it. For only victors and victims exist in this world. With a chuckle, Kushina began to loot the corpses for anything that might be of use and naturally found some shuriken, kunai, ninja wire and such things on hand. Getting an idea, she decided to send Kumo a warning. While humming a tune, she began to scalp the deceased ninjas one by one, gripping their hair and then cutting at the hairline with a saw-like motion until she ripped off their scalps with one good tug. With that done, she hanged the bodies from the trees using the ninja wire, leaving the corpses to limply dangle in the air. Another thing she had found on the bodies were some scraps of paper and a pen, and then wrote a clear message for anyone who so happened to find the bodies. Satisfied with her handiwork, she departed back to Konoha, eager to train as no one had ever trained before in the Forest of Death. Some time later, a Kumo border patrol found the bodies of their fellow ninjas being picked apart by the crows, the sight of their missing scalps causing some to lose their breakfast. And amongst the bodies, the letter was clearly put on display, with the letters being a mixture of blood and ink that read, "I was almost a victim of the legalized rape made by Kumo. I have decided to counteract this evil, with evil. Anyone that dares cross me or my friends and family, shall pay in blood. And I will collect that debt with extreme and unforgiving prejudice." Signed, Kushina Uzumaki. After the incident, Kumo made no further attempts to kidnap the now dubbed, evil Uzumaki. Back in Konoha, many hailed Kushina as a hero for escaping her captors and making it back alive, though the crimson-haired girl didn't much feel like a hero. She just did what she had to do to save herself. Though unknown to many, they had no idea just what kind of monster they now had amongst them. Some years later. I hate this country. It always rains here, muttered a now older Kushina who was now a jonin in her early 20s, grumbling each time she took a step as she felt the waterlogged mud squish between her toes. She really hated this country, but orders were orders, and she had a job to do. After stomping through some more mud, she approached a gate with a small door built into it. She knocked on the door and waited for a moment until a tiny window slid open, allowing the guard on the other side to peer through at her. Password. The guard asked in a gruff voice, making Kushina's eyes twitch a bit in annoyance. How about you take your password and shove it straight up your asshole? Now let me the insume. Kushina answered in a mixture of amusement and mock annoyance. The window snapped shut and some sounds of locks being undone were heard as the door opened, revealing Sume and her partner Kuromaru, who was still but a small pup. Now there's the Kushina I know and love. How do you know it was me? The canine Kunoichi asked as she ushered in her friend and then gave her a hug, to which the crimson-haired Kunoichi returned in kind. Feeling grateful that a friend was here in this godforsaken country. Wet dog smell. And you didn't do a good job of disguising your voice. Kushina teased, making her friend smack her shoulder. The Uzumaki's eyes narrowed as she looked over Sume's shoulders and saw that this place was a prison meant to keep prisoners of war. Many of which seemed to be from either Kumo or Iwa, plus a few from Kiri here and there, judging from the headbands. From the looks of it, they hadn't yet noticed her presence, otherwise they'd be pissing themselves or cowering in fear. Sume separated the hug and spoke, "Welcome to AIM. The end of nowhere, with rain, mud, and lots of war orphans. Definitely the most depressing country in the elemental nations. I'm surprised you got sent all the way out here to the sticks, instead of fighting on the front lines. Word is, you traded blows with the Sandame Rakage and then punted him across the battlefield like a football. That story spread around already. Well, that's not too far off from the truth. I actually blasted him away with a Rasengan. Bastard was fast and strong, like some kind of monster, and tough too. I can see why he managed to fight the Hachibi to a standstill. Too bad I'm a monster in my own right, and I'm much meaner and nastier." Kushina replied with a chuckle, finding it amusing how her exploits would often become famous, making her perhaps one of the most infamous kunoichi in Konoha. "No shit. So what brings you all the way out to our humble little prison?" The canine kunoichi asked with a small smile, though she could only guess that it was for business purposes. "While Minato covers the front lines, Sandame-sama wants me to take care of some problems in our prisons. It seems that our inmates are getting a little uppity, and not taking their Konoha captors seriously. I'm here to make sure that things run smoothly until this goddamn war is over. Now, be a good girl and direct me to whoever is in charge of this place. I don't want to be here any longer than I need to, not when there is killing and murder to be done." Kushina explained, earning a nod from the brown-haired kunoichi since this was undoubtedly a job best left to her since Minato didn't have the needed mindset or air of authority to take control of a prison. Play, God's Gonna Cut You Down. By Johnny Cash. With a grin, Sume motioned for her crimson-haired friend to follow her, with Kuromaru yapping excitedly as he followed his partner. The evil Uzumaki trained behind her longtime friend, passing by the rows of inmates who finally took notice of her presence. The prisoners began to immediately back away to give her as wide a berth as possible, knowing her reputation for murder, maiming, and torture. As she passed them by, she would look at them coldly, as though they were all nothing but annoying bugs for her to squash. It was almost like she didn't even view them as people. And they all knew it too, since many of them had either lost a friend or a member of family to her. Stories of Kushina's cruelty were well known throughout the nations, and they all knew that if the evil Uzumaki was here, someone is going to die. End music. The crimson-haired kunoichi entered the tent of the shinobi currently in charge of the prison and inwardly groaned to find one Kazashi Haruno inside with his feet propped up onto the desk. Kushina to see you, sir. Sum almost choked out the last part, always finding it difficult to address a creep like the pink-haired man with respect. But the bastard was in charge, for now. Ah, thank you Sum-chan. You may go now. Me and Kushina-chan have some things to talk about. The Haruno replied, causing both women to cringe in disgust at being called Chan by the pink-haired man, as though they were long-time friends when they really weren't. With an exhausted sigh, the Inuzuka quickly retreated out of the tent, though decided to keep within earshot in case her friend Kushina needed her, although it was unlikely she'd ever need backup. With Sum gone, Kazashi clapped his hands and spoke, "Thanks for coming on such short notice Kushina-chan. Sorry that you were called out here, but everything is under control." The Uzumaki bit her lip as she fingered her katana, finding the overly friendly behavior of the Haruno to be nothing but an annoyance. Under control, you say? That's not what the reports say. 10 escape attempts have been confirmed at this prison camp. Sandame-sama thinks you aren't able to control the prisoners, so I'm to do your job for you and set an example. The crimson-haired woman replied in a dry tone, not in the mood to play games with the Haruno. If you asked her, he'd be better off as a lawyer or political official given how crooked he is. That won't be necessary Kushina-chan. Those reports were all greatly exaggerated. No inmates have escaped under my careful watch. The Haruno responded coolly as he laced his fingers together. Not yet at least. And your performance isn't inspiring confidence. You have files of inmates in here? She asked him as she approached a file cabinet, earning a nod of confirmation from the Haruno since he kept the names, ranks, and photos of captured inmates on file to better keep track of them. Kushina opened a cabinet and quickly scanned through some of the files, finding it comforting that the files were kept organized. At least that was one thing that pink-haired shinobi was good for. After reading over some names, Kushina closed the cabinet and began to exit the tent, prompting the Haruno to ask, "Hey, where are you going?" His question remained unanswered since she didn't bother giving any kind of response, forcing the pink-haired man to get up from his seat and follow her back outside, where he found her standing in front of the prison yard, with every single prisoner and Konoha ninja looking in her direction. "Inmates, assemble," Kushina barked out, prompting the inmates to line up and stand at attention, their shinobi background enabling them to quickly assemble with their military training. Once they had finished, the crimson-haired woman called out, "When I call your name, step out to the front and line up in a row." With that, Kushina began to call out names one by one. The numerous inmates all wondering what she wanted these people for. After calling out the names of 10 prisoners, who had all lined up in front of the Uzumaki, she gave them a nod of thanks. "Appreciate the cooperation. Makes my job easier," she spoke, and then without warning, she drew her rust-covered katana and lopped off the heads of the 10 prisoners in one smooth motion before heating her blade again. The bodies fell to the ground like puppets with their strings severed, with at least 2 heads rolling to the feet of the other prisoners who all stared with horror in their eyes. In recent weeks, there has been at least 10 confirmed escape attempts. I do not know who is involved, and I don't have the patience to conduct a thorough investigation. My being here is a major inconvenience for me. So, I decided to choose 10 random inmates to murder, who may or may not have been a part of the past escape attempts. If there is another, I will take 20 inmates. And if another happens, I shall take 40. And so on. So ask yourselves for a brief moment, will I be next? Kushina announced to the prisoners with full authority. They all knew in an instant, that if they tried to escape yet again, they could be next. Kushina didn't just kill because it was her job, but because she wanted to. If she felt like it, she could easily murder each and every one of them just for annoying her. Somebody clean this shit up before it starts to stink. The red-haired woman spoke and gestured towards the bodies as blood mixed with the mud and rainwater. Point. Well made, Kushina-chan. Kazashi spoke begrudgingly, feeling that Kushina had taken things a bit too far. It's war. I'm a kunoichi. Murder is pretty much in the official job description. The Uzumaki replied bluntly, wanting to leave AIM as quickly as possible, feeling that things should quiet down now that the inmates no longer seemed willing to gamble with their lives due to her warning and demonstration. If you don't mind, I'm going to find someplace relatively dry to sleep and head out in the morning. I hate all this rain. Kushina continued to speak and then began to walk away, only to stop when she heard a scream belonging to a young girl. Turning around, she saw a girl with blue hair being dragged through the mud by a pair of Konoha ninja, bringing her towards Kazashi. Enemy spy caught, sir. We found her sneaking around outside. One of the ninjas announced, while the pink-haired man licked his lips in a malicious manner, causing Kushina to quirk up an eyebrow. I'm not a spy. Please just let me go. I only wanted some food. The girl cried out in terror as she struggled a bit in the grip of her captors. The Haruno knelt down and cupped her cheek, looking at her face intently as though he were inspecting her. With a satisfied nod, he released the girl and spoke, "Take her for interrogation. I'll question this little spy myself." The Uzumaki immediately sensed his intentions and put a hand on his shoulder, squeezing tightly until the sounds of bone cracking could be heard, making the Haruno yelp out in pain. His eyes were the same as the many Kumo nin that Kushina had murdered, most specifically like the ones she had first killed. They had that same lust and hunger in them. She knew what he was, and she wouldn't let him do it to a young girl, spy or not. No, I will question the girl. You touch her again, and I will kill you. Consequences be damned. Kushina warned the Haruno, making him gulp a bit, but he nodded in compliance all the same. She then released his shoulder and followed the two ninjas to the interrogation cell, who were now cuffing the girl to the table. Even as she cried and sobbed and begged them to let her go, but they ignored her pleas. Kushina then gestured for them to leave, allowing for her and the girl to be alone. The poor thing still quivering like a leaf in the wind while crying in fear. Do you know who I am? Kushina asked in a dispassionate tone. If this girl was a spy, she would find out one way or another. The girl looked up to the crimson-haired woman and shook her head, no, to the question. Making the Uzumaki smirk a bit as she asked, does the name, the evil Uzumaki, ring a bell or two? At her second question, the girl had a look of realization as she tensed up. Her face turning a pure white color like a certain sanin. You're her, aren't you? I've heard stories. They say you carve up your enemies and turn them into meat, then you cook their flesh over an open fire and eat them. Are you going to eat me? The girl asked with a fresh stream of tears spilling down her face. Kushina inwardly sweat dropped, unsure of how such wild stories got started, though she made no attempts to stop them since they made people, most specifically her enemies, all the more terrified, and thus added to her legend. Haven't decided yet. So, try to change my mind. What's your name, girl? The red-haired woman asked in a sickly sweet tone, making the girl shiver a bit. Conan. My name is Conan. Please, just let me go. I only wanted a little food. The girl pleaded with a doe-eyed look that would make most women, and even men, melt from the pure cuteness. Fortunately for Kushina, she being a trained sociopath, was able to turn off any and all emotions. Instead, she grabbed the Conan girl's hands and began to inspect them. No calluses or blisters. No scarring from shinobi training. Some paper cuts, either you are an avid reader or practice origami. Skin pigment typical of an AIM resident due to lack of sunlight leading to paleness. You have any brothers? Kushina asked at the end, making the girl tense up and avert her eyes a bit. No. It's just me. I'm alone, Conan replied, causing the crimson-haired woman to frown a bit and release the girl's hands. Kushina knew she couldn't have been alone, since there were some orange hair strands in the shoulder area of her clothes, and they didn't seem to be from an animal. Now Conan, I don't like it when people lie to me. You ever play five-finger fillet? The Uzumaki asked as she pulled out a kunai, placing the tip between the girl's fingers. The brunette looked ready to yank her hand back, but a dirty look from the redhead warned her not to. You'd better hope I don't lose my concentration. Of course, if you were to tell me about your brother or brothers, I could stop. The redhead offered, but was only met with the amber-eyed stare of the girl. With a smirk, she lifted up the kunai and began to slowly bring down the tip between the girl's fingers, making a tapping noise. After a few moments, Kushina sped up, jabbing the kunai in the space between Conan's digits, causing her to dryly swallow as she watched the tip chip at the wood of the table, while silently praying she wouldn't lose her fingers. And then, Kushina sped up again until the kunai became a blur as she wildly stabbed between Conan's fingers. Terrified, the girl clenched her eyes shut, waiting for the torture to end, but still, she couldn't put Yahiko and Nagato in any danger. Especially if it meant selling them out to this crazy woman. I have nothing to say to you. Conan squeaked out, and then a loud slam was heard, making her jump in her seat. But she felt no pain in her hand and fingers. Carefully opening one eye, she saw that the spaces between her fingers had been worn down and chipped apart, but her fingers were left unscathed. The kunai embedded between her pinky and ring fingers. I like you, Conan. You didn't sell out your family. Not even under threat against, well, me. If there were more people like you, that would protect their family as you just did, the world might be better off. Guards. The crimson-haired woman barked out, prompting a pair of shinobi to burst in, ready for her orders. Release the girl. Give her a week's worth of rations and send her on her way. As for Kazashi, tell him he's relieved of duty. She spoke, causing one guard to immediately begin unlocking the cuffs on the girl. On what charge for Kazashi-san? The second guard asked with a raised eyebrow, prompting the red-haired woman to slam her knee into his groin, his eyes nearly bugging out from the pain now in his loins. Any charge I feel like, was all Kushina answered as she shoved the shinobi away as he clutched his groin. It wasn't long before Conan walked out with a duffel bag full of rations, giving a bow of thanks to the red-haired woman. Thank you. I owe you a lot, Kushina-sama. Someday, I hope to repay your kindness. The brunette spoke with a wide smile since she now had some food to bring back to Yahiko and Nagato. The red-haired woman then smirked and ruffled the girl's hair. Take care, kid. And remember, there are only victors and victims in this world. Never let yourself become a victim. Kushina warned the girl, who nodded and left as quickly as possible. The Uzumaki sighed deeply with a small smile gracing her lips. She definitely wasn't a saint. She would freely admit she was a cold-blooded murderer, but it sometimes felt nice to do a good deed. Though Kushina couldn't help but wonder, if she had damned that girl to more pain and suffering. After all, life itself was cruel and unforgiving. To live is to suffer. Every single day an uphill battle for survival. But, still, she hoped to end this stupid war and make the world a little brighter for when she would birth her first child. She wanted her first child to be raised in a time of peace, free of want and desire. To aid in her quest of rebuilding their clan to its former glory if her child is a boy. But for now, that dream seemed so far off. She could only wish her child wouldn't need to suffer as she had over the years. To become a trained sociopath, to become a killer, Kushina had to give up much of herself. Sacrificing her morals, her innocence, until she learned how to turn off her emotions like flipping a light switch. To kill without feeling was both a blessing and a curse. She didn't feel guilty for the people she had murdered, but at the same time, she had found it to be easy. Too easy. She didn't see any end in sight for her, to hang up her katana and live a life of peace. But still, she would continue to her evil ways. Even if she had to murder 1,000, or 1,000,000 people. Even if she had to tear down nations, or be hailed as pure evil, it would all be worth it for the sake of her clan's future. And nothing would get in her way. End flashback. Present time. So, my dad was a creepy UAL predator. Sakura asked with a gulp, feeling bad for that poor Conan girl who could have been a potential victim if her mistress hadn't stepped in. Yeah, turns out he was leveraging UAL favors from some female prisoners for better living conditions and food. Sometimes he'd take advantage of passing refugees looking for food and shelter. Bastard knew who to keep close, and to keep away from his escapades. He was stripped of his headband and kicked out of the shinobi force. Made a killing as a lone shark and then pretty much bought his way into the shinobi council. He's been a perpetual thorn in my side ever since and has constantly hated me. Never came around to killing him, though I probably should have. I thought I castrated him by crushing his testicles, which didn't seem to work since he somehow made you. Guess I enjoyed tormenting him too much for my own good. Kushina explained with a lazy yawn as she continued to write out her speech. What happened to that Conan girl? You ever see her again? Sakura asked as she finished putting the Hokage portraits into the trash to finish up her duties, hoping to see her mother soon. Conan. She and 2 other boys trained under Jiraiya for a bit till they learned to take care of themselves. Me and the old bastard kept tabs on them for a while. They led a rebellion against Hanzo the Salamander. One of the boys, kid called Yahiko, died. The others kinda dropped off the radar. Far as I know, I think they're still out there somewhere. I never assume someone is dead unless I see a corpse for myself or it is irrefutable that they're really dead. The red-haired Hokage explained with a tired sigh. Anyways, go on. Get out of here already. Say hi to your mom for me, I haven't maimed you, stuff like that. The Godime spoke while making a shooing motion with her hand. The Pinkett bowed in thanks and then spoke. You know, you might be a bully, but I don't think you're a bad person. Wrong, Pinkie Pie. I'm rotten to the core. I'm the evil Uzumaki for a reason. I only told you a bit about my past. I've got war stories up the wazoo that'll make you piss yourself and turn that bubble gum pink hair if yours into pure silver. Trust me, if I told you about some of the nastier stuff, you'd be having nightmares for years to come. And, have you seriously forgotten how I broke your fingers? Now you're trying to be all buddy-buddy with me. What the air you? An anime character. Kushina retorted, refusing Sakura's compliment and questioning the girl's sanity. Without a word further, the Pinkett bowed and left to go see her mother for the rest of the day. Upon leaving, the Uzumaki woman sighed deeply as she sank into her seat. Feeling that in some ways, she had failed her son. For her, it wasn't that long ago that he was in her belly and she had given birth to him. Now he was a teenager who grew up with no influence of a parent. Oh, Naruto-kun, I'd sacrifice anything to turn back the clock and give you the childhood you deserved. But I can't, best I can do is make up for lost time now. She muttered to herself as she resumed her work. Unknown to her, for the brief moment, word of her return was spreading across the nations. Meanwhile, Iwa, in the office of the Tsuchikage, Onoki sighed as he finished the last of his paperwork for the day and was eager to read about the latest article of the newspaper. As he flipped open the paper and began reading the front page, his eyes bugged out of his head. A sickening crack was heard, followed by a yell of pain. Gah! My back! Onoki yelled out as he collapsed to the floor, a foamy substance coming out of his mouth as he passed out while blue in the face. The Sandaime Tsuchikage was later found unconscious with an expression of pure horror on his face. And immediately called that it was time to head to Konoha. Kumo. The Raikage was busy with his daily workout routine, lifting a set of dumbbells after finishing out the duties of paperwork. Although he wished he knew a jutsu to finish it faster so he could train longer. He was interrupted when the doors to his office burst open, revealing the form of his brother Killer Bee, who was babbling some kind of nonsense, with Mabui and Team B following close behind. Our apologies, A-sama. But Sensei seems to have gotten worked up over something. Samui spoke apologetically while trying to make some sense of what was happening as her sensei continued to speak in some inane gibberish. What the hell are you trying to say, B? Is that jargon supposed to be some kind of new rapping style of yours? Speak. I command you to speak. A demanded as he tossed aside the large dumbbell and approached his brother, who thrust a newspaper into his chest. Growing curious, the Yondaime Raikage looked at the front page, which seemed to have been crumpled in his brother's grip, and then let out a war cry as he ripped the newspaper in half. Batten down the hatches. Assemble the entire shinobi corps of Kumo. Prepare for an S-rank emergency. Impose martial law, stat. The Raikage bellowed, as he slammed his fists together. Wah, Raikage Dono, are we under some kind of attack? Mabui asked as she jotted down his orders, wondering what was causing the two brothers to behave like this. We might be. Brother. Mabui. Team B. We are making an emergency visit to Konoha. Tell Darui that's he's in charge until I return. If she has returned, we need to make peace and fast. Somebody find Yugito. We may need her too. The Raikage shouted with multiple tick marks appearing on his head that looked ready to burst at any moment. Kiri. Congratulations on your new appointment, Mei-sama. Spoke the form of Ao to the newly minted Godime Mizukage, Mei Terumi, who was a central figure in the Kiri rebels who had finally deposed her predecessor, Yugura, after a long and brutal civil war that had cost the lives of many people. Civilian, shinobi and otherwise. Mei muttered as she stared at the newspaper in her hands while sipping at some coffee. Rebuilding won't be easy. And Kiri doesn't have a positive reputation amongst the villages. It will be difficult gaining any sort of humanitarian aid. Ao continued to speak with a tired sigh, knowing that the restoration of Kiri was going to be a long and arduous road. Mei responded again, obviously distracted by whatever article she was reading in the papers. Ao narrowed his visible eye a bit and decided to test and see if she was actually paying attention. Perhaps a political marriage is in order. I hear that the daimyo of Kiri is very eager to meet. His sentence was cut off as he felt a dark and sinister aura come from the Mizukage that gave him a chilling smile. Ow, if you don't stop pestering me, I'll kill you. I was just in the middle of reading something interesting. It would seem that a certain person has become the new Godime Hokage. Come, we must go to Konoha, immediately. Mei spoke as she set aside her newspaper. Konoha. That may not be wise. Out of all the villages, our relations with Konoha may be the worst of them all. Ao lamented, wondering what was going through the lava user's head. Have a little bit of faith, Ao. You may be pleasantly surprised. Was all Mei said as she gave a haughty laugh. Oto. So, Kushina lives then. I knew that woman was too stubborn to die. Word was, she died after the Kyuubi attack. I can only suspect that old Warhawk Danzo had something to do with her disappearance. Out of all the people that could have become Hokage, she is the worst. Orochimaru spoke in annoyance as he tossed aside his newspaper. If word had reached the international newspapers, it wouldn't be long before Kushina herself realizes that people are now aware of her presence, unless she had been counting on that. What do you mean by that? Just what kind of kunoichi are we talking about? I have only heard wild tales and stories about her exploits. Like how she butchered a platoon of Kumo nin, painted the field crimson with their entrails and then fed their bodies to some pigs to be shipped to Kumo. Kabuto spoke, finding such a story ridiculous, only to notice a glare from his master. Trust me, those stories, whether they be totally outlandish or embellished, always hold some truth to them. Kushina was amongst the most violent kunoichi to ever live. Some say she is actually a monster, wearing the skin of a human female. Regardless of whatever form of fiction exists, the cold hard truth is that she is a woman unafraid to do whatever she needs to do, in order to get what she wants. Although violence seems to be her go-to solution. Towards the end of the Shinobi War, she had the entirety of the nations in stranglehold of fear. No one could even utter her name without shuddering if terror. Even the cages knew better than to cross her, for fear of her tearing down their villages out of petty vengeance. She was larger than life Kabuto, and unlike many tyrants and self-proclaimed villains in history, she is fully capable of destroying the nations as we know it. I can only imagine that the other nations will be clamoring to gain her favor and to get in her good graces before she has the chance to think about destroying them. Orochimaru explained grimly, knowing he wasn't a match for the Uzumaki even with his full might. Then, how are we to destroy her? Surely she's not invincible. The spectacled ninja spoke with a small chuckle. Hard to say, but I do have one potential weapon that could give us the edge we need to defeat her. Hopefully we aren't too late. Because if she sets her sights on us, there will be nothing we can do to stop her. Best to strike while we still have the element of surprise. The Sanin replied as he turned towards a series of coffins. Suna. Yahahaha. I know that crazy bitch. She's a monster. You don't wanna go messing around with her. Spoke a voice inside of Gaara's mind, the Jinchuriki now clasping his head in pain as he heard Shukaku cackling inside of his mind. Mother. What are you talking about? You've been screaming nonsense since you saw that newspaper through my eyes. Gaara muttered, wondering what may have caused his mother to start acting up like this. After a few moments of silence, the one-tailed Biju replied, to answer your question with another question, what do you think's gonna happen now that a true monster has returned? It's going to happen soon, you know. Shukaku answered with a chuckle, the tone of which the Biju spoke sounded like it was waiting for something to happen. Is there anyone at the top now? Who's ruling these lands now? The daimyos? The cages of the nations? Or is it Jinchuriki like yourself, scratching out an existence as living weapons now? Some strong people are rising up and appearing throughout the world, and that crazy lady is one of them, just waiting to throw the world upside down. That clan has been hiding in the shadows of history, and its new resurgent has finally appeared. The natural enemies of the gods has returned. Soon, the ultimate battle for supremacy shall begin. That accursed bloodline will soon be dragged down through the mud and cast into darkness. The number of shinobi throughout this world has been expanding steadily. Oh,